There we go.
Well, I've got kind of two thoughts on it. Uh, once you've put this kind of effort to get these groups together, it seems kind of arbitrary to say, well, 12 months is up, you've done good, go forth and be happy. But I do think that I think it's an idea worth exploring. I do wonder a little bit if there would be more synergy if the groups has a little bit more in common. That each of the groups was doing some really interesting things, but there wasn't as much crossover. So I think sometimes we kind of struggled to find the place where we kind of would start to fit together, and we were kind of listening to the interesting stuff that everybody else was doing. And maybe, I don't know, at least for me, I kept thinking, well, how or where could we use that in community change? Or how could community change impact that? And I don't know that I ever really found a place. So, and again, so that conversely, having 5 or 6 groups meeting independently is way too much to ask anybody to take on, because that would be probably a full-time job mentoring those kind of groups. So
Right.
I'm not sure I have an answer to it. I just wonder if there would be more gained in having a little more of a common set of goals, or beyond just all being involved in community development.
Mm-hmm. Others? Well, and so to me, the question is, what are we asking them to evaluate? That, Sharon, that's a great perspective from somebody that's gone through it, but to ask that question of the membership of CDS, they're going to look at it and say, I don't know what you guys did.
Yeah, and I don't know that the membership is going to. I don't know. The membership doesn't seem to always connect. I don't know, there's something weird going on with the membership right now, but they don't seem to connect that well to some of this kind of stuff.
Right.
So I don't know what they do connect to right now. I'm kind of struggling trying to understand what they do connect to.
Yeah, well, me too. So, okay. Mary, are we treading on the conversation of kind of reviewing this, or is that a good segue into talking about how we
haven't really got to anything related to trying to do the ripple mapping yet,
okay.
But we could segue to that.
So that actually was the big piece of this. There were a couple things that got brought forward on the last webinar. One was that the idea of putting together about a 2-page summation of what each of these project groups did. And in my mind, it was Rhonda that actually suggested it, and I agreed. But in my mind, putting together a 2-pager was a way of being able to kind of capture, or at least go through and think through the story that we want to tell, so that would help us with this presentation for CDS. It's also a way to start to capture and articulate what we learned through this process, so that we could be that much further ahead as we start to develop kind of chapters or reports for the CD practice. So we've got the opportunity to do an entire CD practice. I can give an overview of this is the genesis of how this came about, and how it was set up. And then if each of you wanted to talk about through the Community Change Network, this is how we approached it and what we learned. Through the youth engagement, this is how we approached it and what we learned. I was thinking each of those would be its own kind of journal article, if you will. Was that how you guys also envisioned this?
I'm fine with that layout. I'm more concerned about when you want the deadline to be.
we don't have a deadline. We that's what I was saying, that Craig gave us. I'll ask him. Early on, I think they wanted CD practice to go out 4 times a year. I think the last time it went out was about a year ago. And so they've got another one that they're planning and pushing to have released in July. And I'm thinking within the 6 months after July, hopefully we could have ours ready to go by maybe December and get it published early 2019. Now I haven't run that past Craig yet, but that was the time frame that was in my mind.
Well, there'll be new CD practice editors coming on board.
Yeah.
So might as well wait and see what they say.
Yeah. But if we did it, we would have hopefully our materials ready so that even with the new CD practice editors on board, we could have one ready to submit. So everybody's quiet. Good. Is that good, bad, too ambitious, workable?
Well, I think it's workable because, I mean, you have to keep in mind CD practice, isn't really held to the standards that the journal is. I mean, sometimes I think people try and make it that way, but that's really not the intent there. The intent is to share with membership ideas, best practices in community development, and to use it as a kind of a resource or a tool for people. So I think that's part of what we need to keep in mind there too, is that it's more of an educational piece.
Right.
And that sometimes doesn't always come across in some of the articles. And I think that's sometimes part of the problem, is people try and write it as a complex journal article. Right. And that's why they have so much trouble getting these things published. I think they need to kind of rethink. I mean, we don't want to, you don't want crap coming out in it, but I also think you need to rethink the way you're putting some of your standards together on it too. Right.
I agree in that these weren't research projects. They were pilot projects. Mm-hmm. We did have hopefully something we were trying to accomplish, and we tested it, and we can report out on it. But yet, it isn't the same maybe template as the other. I did share the template on Google Docs. Were all of you able to see that?
Yep.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
I couldn't get into it, Dan, because my Google Docs uses my Google email.
Yeah, you sent that to me. I sent you another email, so try.
Try it again. Okay.
Well, no. Let me know how I can do it differently. If that second time, Mary, I sent it to that email address, but.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah. So see if that.
That's the email address I never look at.
I do the same thing.
It seems to me that maybe part of the discussion after we talk a little bit about outcomes and impact is for the CD practice article, if we come up with, here are some key elements of trying to do this kind of work of creating interest groups within an organization, that then the individual articles could maybe address those main points, so there's some coherence around key learning elements.
I like that. Yes, that makes a lot of sense to me. John, you look concerned. You good?
No, I'm just reading the Google Doc.
Oh, that for the most part, yeah, that was the criteria for the CD practice. Okay, so I like that, Mary, and the idea. So this afternoon, what we had said in one sentence at a time here, Dan. Hang on. So what we had said in our last webinar was that we'd like to set aside some time in this webinar to actually do some kind of reflection and try to pull learnings out from this fellows project. And so I asked Mary if we could do a ripple map of that process. And she said, hey, we'll give it a shot. Is that fair? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this a good time? Shall we try to do that and just see? It's a very small group, so we'll need you all to be very vocal. But are you ready to give that a shot, Mary?
Sure.
Okay.
So for ripple mapping, what we try to do is think about the overall fellows project as a pebble that you drop in the pond, and we want to trace the ripple effects. And so we've got 4 different projects connected to that pebble, so that's going to make it complicated, but I think we can still use some of the basic questions and get it to help us think more deeply about the impact of the model of having the fellows, and then the work that you've done with your group. So we normally use the community capitals as a way to get people to think broadly about the ripple. And so that would be the natural capital, cultural capital, human capital, social capital, political capital, built capital, and financial capital. So thinking about those kinds of resources, assets, and community as a way to think about possibilities. But when you think about the Fellows Project that you're involved in, and you think about the work that you've been doing, as a result of the work that you've done in the Fellows Project, what do you see you and your colleagues doing differently? Or what kinds of things have you gotten engaged in that were value added or different from what you normally do?
I can go. I think that participating in the Fellows Project for us and then with the Detroit team, it provided us with kind of like an opportunity to bring together practitioners from across the field here in the city of Detroit to talk about an important topic, that being community engagement. So we wouldn't, I think everyone talks a lot about it, kind of like, and likes to think about it, but it gave us kind of an opportunity to actually engage in some pretty deep discussion about what that means in the field here in Detroit. And we're now kind of gathering all those discussions and thoughts into kind of almost a set of recommendations for the field, for funders, for our organizations, for municipal players. So that was really the opportunity that we saw through this fellows program, and that's what we went and did.
So you expanded the social capital?
I think so.
And you increased your human capital in terms of learning about different programs and activities, and then really started looking at how you could mobilize that human capital and social capital into political capital and make changes, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. That sounds really exciting.
It is. I'm pretty excited about it.
Think about that activity. As a result of doing that activity, have you seen any changes in the organizations that you work with, or how the organizations interact with each other?
I think there's been some changes in interaction, just that people who are doing similar types of work in different organizations that we brought together got a chance to know each other better, which I think was important. Like, sometimes I kind of take for granted, that, our organization is like a membership association for the whole city of Detroit. So I get to meet a lot of these people, but then I don't realize that people on one side of town don't really meet or know other people on the other side of town, even though they have very, I feel like they both do similar types of work and are both very good at what they do. So I think that was a good opportunity to bring people together who don't often get a chance to interact and just kind of share about what they do, the work that they do, how it's different, how it's the same, and kind of learn from each other in that sense. And we did that over a series of, we've had 3 sessions. We're going to have a 4th one still with this group of people. And it's interesting because we start off with slightly larger groups, but, you know, I think there's a smaller core of about 5, 6, 7 people who come to every single meeting and really kind of like dug into the topic and taken the time. So, been good.
John or Sharon, do you have any thoughts about how involvement in the Fellows Project has led you or your colleagues to do things differently?
For our group, I've said this a lot, our goal was to improve the culture of welcoming students and young professionals into the organization. And that really just entails reaching out to people and having conversations and providing clarifying information about the organization, what it means to belong to a professional organization, and also offering monetary discounts on membership to help students and young professionals, because throughout some of these conversations we held lunches and provided food for these individuals, and a lot of the conversation focuses around how much does it cost and what do I get out of this, and do I really belong in this organization if I'm not going to go on to become a doctor and work in university. And so I think there are some misconceptions about I have to be doing some significant research in order to belong to an organization, and getting the word out that you can be a practitioner and present information that's just as valuable as what others are doing. And also creating opportunities at the CDS conference for students to get together. As I know Gary and I have like a roundtable discussion where we're bringing these together. Because one of our goals is also to stay connected throughout the year, not just show up to CDS, you know, reconnect with everybody and then say, hey, I'll see you next year. So kind of keep the camaraderie going throughout the year and continue these conversations and that sort of thing.
Sharon.
Well, I've been sitting here pondering this because I think that in some ways our group was in a little bit of a different place. You know, we'd been meeting for a while, so we weren't a new group like, or, you know, some of the other groups were brand new or they were just getting formed. We had a couple of years of kind of under our belt of having done things, but I think that for us being part of the CD Fellows really helped us maybe focus our attention a little bit. We had a lot of different projects and things that we'd kind of kicked around over the time. You know, we were able to pull that survey together last year for the conference in Boise, and then of course, you know, Connie's doing the presentation for us at IACD tomorrow or the day Wednesday. I can't remember which day it is. We've, I think, continued to struggle a bit on one of the key initiatives that we wanted to do, and that was the working with the foundations. That I think what we find is that they're open and they're very open and very receptive to the concept, but we just can't seem to find the champion that's willing to kind of step up and take the lead for us with that community. I do think we may have an opportunity now with some of the rural foundations, and we'll just have to kind of wait and see how that plays out with them. They're meeting, I think, in October. I think time's going to get away from us maybe on that one, but and again, that idea of trying to really to formulate where does the Community Development Society have an opportunity to engage with national funders around community development, and how do we set, should we establish some set of common measures that could be used to evaluate the impact of programming that's trying to impact community change. So I don't know, Mary, I know you're in an awkward thing, you're leading in part of the team, but I don't know, you got any other thoughts?
So
I think you really nailed it in terms of the focus, that the community change group has been around for, I think, close to 10 years.
Yeah, I was hesitating to give a time, but that sounds about right.
And we have kind of lost focus, so it does, being in the fellowship process gives us a specific thing that we know we have to report on and we have to be accountable to. And I think both Aaron and John mentioned that to some degree, that the Fellows Project frames an activity that you feel like you need to be able to report on.
Mm-hmm.
let me explore that a minute. Because you're right, Sharon. You said, where does CDS engage with funders, and where does CDS engage with students, and where does CDS engage with any kind of groups? And what it seems like this does, that's a little bit of maybe a rhetorical question, but the fellows became an outreach arm that was organized and convening with, or attempting to convene with, a specific group on behalf of CDS. And that doesn't happen otherwise, because you get a board that's all over the world, and they meet not very often, and to take action between meetings, the fellows maybe has played an interesting role.
And that maybe, I'm just thinking out loud here, but maybe that's a component of the future of the CD Fellows, is trying to figure out where does community development sit with these various, because I think what we've got here is a pretty representational set of groups. We've got students, we've got international, that really, how does the society connect with them? How do we become meaningful and impactful to them? That's the only way we're going to get membership increases, that we have to be meaningful, and membership has to have an impact on either the organization or the individual.
Yeah. Good. I feel like that's pretty insightful, actually. As we're going through, that's a good.
Because as money gets tight in organizations, these are the kind of questions we're being asked. If you're engaging with that group, what's the benefit for us to engage with that group? What are we going to get out of it? Show me the impact. Show me the outcome. Show me how this improves our organization.
Good. Mary,
so let me go back to the big pebble in the pond question. And as a result of being part of the Fellows Program, have your ideas about how to reach out and engage people in the context of CDS changed, developed? I mean, how has your thinking about that evolved since you first put the project together?
Well, for community change, I think it's really helped us focus in on what we need to do. And I think we've, now that we've reached out and talked with any number of the foundations, I think we understand we're on the right track. But I think it also helped us see that we're not crafting our message in a way that resonates with them. That maybe sometimes we're community developers and we talk to each other in code, and we try and go out into the world and they don't quite understand that our little internal language.
How do I capture that? That was really good. I just broke the CD code, but
Well, I mean, I think that I guess I see it a lot. We're all involved in community development in one way or the other. We kind of all understand the principles. We kind of get it. But then we go out and try and talk to somebody that isn't part of our club, and we forget sometimes that we have to talk to them in their language. And that's kind of a sad commentary on us as community developers, that we've forgotten that we've got to reach people where they are, and we expect them to come to where we are, and we've really got to go to where they are.
Yes, that's good.
And that was, I think, something that really resonates for me, at least with our community change group, is that we really need to work on that a lot.
So Erin and John, in your work with your groups, did you have a similar experience of having to think about how to reframe the message to be more effective in communicating to the larger group that you work with or want to work with?
I had some similar experiences. Mine isn't necessarily reframing. There's a bit of reframing how that message was relayed, but it's kind of sad to admit this. It took me until the very end to realize we need some sort of handout to give to people instead of saying, hey, go to this website. And like, whenever I had the meetings, I would show them the website. I'd send them the website in an email, but what they really need was like a one-page handout that can give you all the information you're looking for that you don't have to go discover on your own through the web page. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Erin, any thoughts about over the course of the Fellows Project, changing your thinking about how to engage people and how to frame things?
He may have left.
good.
No, I'm still here on the phone. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Thanks for hanging in there.
Yeah. Well, I hit leave meeting and then it kicked me off the phone and I had to get back on. So changing, like, how do I engage people? Because it's a little tricky because, like, our project is about engagement. And so you're asking about how do we engage people in those kind of conversations and, like, group learning, or how do we think about engagement more generally, I guess? It doesn't matter.
I think we're interested in all of the above.
Yeah, I don't have anything coming to the top of mind right now. I would just say it's not so much a change, it just kind of has reinforced a lot of things I suspected. I think also, I think it's important, just this whole concept of engagement is such an amorphous kind of thing and can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, that it's incredibly important to try and put some definitions and standards around it. Even though it's hard, it can feel like a moving target a lot of the time. But yeah, I think so. I think that our field will do better with some standards and better understanding of and definitions of, like, what is even meant by engagement? What are the kind of different levels of engagement? Where are you fitting along a whole spectrum of engagement practices, and why, and how does that relate to, institutional power and power for community members to make decisions? Like, it's kind of a lot, but I think those are all things that we've talked a lot about internally here in my organization, in the city in general, but I think this has been a good opportunity to flesh more of that out.
So it has encouraged people that are part of the group to have a different kind of conversation, both with themselves and when they go back to their organization.
I think so, and I think it's the type of conversation that people have been wanting to have. I think there's a lot of, just because I think there's a lot of anxiety and angst around, how decisions are made and how do you involve community. So I think people have been having those conversations, but it gave people a space to do it, and hopefully in a way that's going to provide some kind of outcome that helps move that conversation forward.
Hey, Aaron, so was there a change in how decisions were made? Or was there just talk about how decisions were made?
Oh, that's just talk. We're just some rabble rousers at this point. We still have to make strategy.
Yeah.
We're just some idealistic rabble rousers at this point. The next stage is to really kind of like present these ideas and get more buy-in and broaden the conversation.
I'm sorry for saying just. I didn't mean to minimize it.
No, I think it's totally fair.
No, well, so
no need to apologize.
All right, I do think it starts there, and it has to start there, and that's often a really big just to get that conversation going. But I didn't know if the systems or the processes had changed.
No, and it's going to take a lot more work, but
okay,
we got to start with our ground we're staking out.
Okay.
So you have the expectation that this group will continue to meet after the CDS meeting and continue that work of bringing people together around what are the standards, what are the best practices, how do we understand engagement more effectively?
Me?
I think that's a hope. Are you talking about specifically for the Detroit group? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think that's a hope. I think there's a couple pieces to that. I think that there's an interest. I think there's at least an interest in having the opportunity for people to get together and continue to talk and learn from each other, and maybe doing it in slightly more social settings. But I think there's also an interest in kind of pushing forward some kind of agenda, and that's going to take a little more work, and we'll see how people kind of stay bought into it. It might be something that is pushed from our organization a little more directly, and we have this group of people that kind of advise us and provide that input. So it's kind of hard to see, and it's nice that we kind of had this time limited piece, and I don't know, we'll see. Right. But I would definitely be open to that, and I think other people in the group are interested in continuing as well.
So, John, what are your thoughts about that question about as a result of you all working together over the past year, do you think of yourselves as having developed different ways of thinking and doing around how you get people involved in community development or in CDS or in an organization, or linking the principles to a practice?
Yeah, I've always thought that this experience was more of a prototyping phase. I know from the conversations we had earlier, like CDS is going to want to see these grand outputs that have occurred. But in my opinion, this is just like a testing phase. We're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And whoever continues this program, we've been the guinea pigs, and so we're kind of getting more information about what works and what doesn't work. And I think, like I said, we want to be very careful about what our expectations are, because they can get really big, and we want to make sure that they're legit things that we've set in place or that can happen over time. This isn't I never thought going into the program that throughout a whole entire year we're going to bring in 250 new student members, so trying to be realistic about what our expectations are, and how can those change next year and the year after that. But I definitely think it's something that can continue on.
Hey, John, so the internet wobbled a little bit, and I was having a hard time understanding. So if you were to summarize a key learning from what you just said, how do I write that?
I would say have realistic expectations throughout the year, and remember that this is a prototyping phase, and that this is a program that should continually evolve.
Okay. Set realistic expectations and realize it will evolve. That's I don't know if you can see that's what I wrote. Does that capture what you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Sharon, any thoughts about community change, thinking and doing things differently?
Well, I think that from my perspective anyway, I think we need to really focus in on what is it the thing we want to accomplish here. We keep talking about working with the foundations. I don't know that I'm not sure if that thing actually has legs under it, but we need to decide if it does or it doesn't. We did the survey around education. In some ways, I think that actually offers more opportunity for us. I think there's also an interesting opportunity for us to take a slightly different approach here and maybe do some research around and writing about what is community change and start to look at how that's being implemented and develop some writings. I was about to say a product, but I don't want to go down that route. But maybe some articles, et cetera, that really talk about best practices in that area. I think we've got enough. I think we know enough to at least to take that route. I'm not convinced that the foundations thing is. I just don't see it has any legs under it at this point.
I hate to ask this, but I really thought that was the golden idea. I love the idea of getting them involved in those conversations and then.
I do too.
Yeah.
And I think maybe in some ways the better approach would be to take a look at what are all those measures that those foundations are using, and instead of trying to get them together to have the conversation, that we actually pull together a set of recommendations. It's always easier. People are people. It's a lot easier for people to attack something that's on paper than to sit down and work with you to write something. So sometimes I wonder if we wouldn't be better off just putting a set of recommendations out there and then let the foundations tell us why it wouldn't work. And then say, okay, well, if that won't work, then what would work? And take that approach.
I think that this whole creation piece is scary. I mean, in all of our groups, it sounds like, creating something new or trying something new was maybe risky and or the audience that we were hoping to get engaged to try something new, like the foundations or new students, there wasn't enough incentive or somehow they didn't appreciate the value of it. So that's an interesting takeaway.
Mm-hmm. So Dan, thinking about the other groups and your interaction with them, International and Rhonda's group, any thoughts about how people are thinking differently about the work or working with each other?
Yeah. So I don't want to speak on their behalf, though, because they're a lot closer to it than I am. But from here and from conversations, I also see that international is, there's a good idea that we're trying to kind of push out and having a hard time getting people to co-create those conversations. Jim has repeatedly said they've had some really good conversations with very small groups of people, and so there are some groups that it resonates with, and yet it's hard to try to get that that attention. With ISQUALS, in my mind, what they're doing is that they're saying we've got two associations that have in that kind of Venn diagram a little bit of an overlap of common interests. And how can we align our organizations? So to me, that one's more of a structural question of how do we align our organizations so that we can share the benefits of both without losing the costs of membership to one or the other, without being competitive. And so that to me is, and I don't know what their takeaway is, but to me that was just really fascinating to think about. And I don't know if members frame it in this way, but in an era of limited resources, how do you maximize association membership with two different associations?
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer to that is yet, but
yeah, at some point the equation has to be that more participation does not equal less financial support.
Yeah. Well, and there's another piece of that, and that is it goes back a little bit to the decision making. And do the fellows do we have the authority to set up a working relationship with the foundations, or do we have the authority to set up a working relationship between two associations? Do we have the authority to launch student groups across the, and so there's a piece of that even in terms of just the functionality of how does the fellows, once we start initiating something, make sure that we come back and work with the board or with the association or get approval. So that piece of it has been kind of uncertain and maybe part of a struggle here too. That's not related to any specific initiative, but it's kind of overall in terms of even how do the fellows work in conjunction with we're kind of a loose association of interested people. And so that's, to me, that's a thing about finding the role of the board and what does the Community Development Society want.
Yeah. I'm going to have to sign off now, but thank you all for the conversation.
Hey, Aaron, thank you for coming. Thanks for being a part of this and for your ideas. We'll share them.
Absolutely. All right.
All right.
Looking forward to the next step. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
So a follow-up question would be, based on the fact that you generated some work, explored some avenues, learned some things, what are your aspirations for what'll happen next?
Okay, I kind of shared mine earlier. It's that the students that I engaged with throughout the year, that we stay engaged throughout next year. It's not just this one and done mentality where, oh, okay, well, I reached out to these people, see you later kind of thing. So staying connected throughout the whole year.
So do you think if you were a fellows group stage 2 that would facilitate that, or that you've built enough of an organization that you can continue whether you have the fellows designation or not?
I think we would do both. We would continue with the people that we have and add more people. That job will never be done, adding and reaching out to new potential members.
So the fellows framework is a useful framework for getting people together, and keeping them together.
Yeah.
Sharon, any thoughts about aspirations? I mean, you talked about maybe trying to look at recommendations rather than.
Yeah, I think that the next step for community change maybe is to take all of this, everything that we've learned in the past year, find a way for us, I think, to one of the challenges we have is we're so dispersed across the country. I think we have to find a way to be in the same room and just sit down and really work out a new work plan with some specific goals. I think we can accomplish a lot. It's just that I'm not sure a lot of that can get accomplished with an hour phone call once a month.
Right.
Dan, thoughts about aspirations?
Oh, aspirations. So let me back up and ask a clarifying question if I can. So Sharon, that was for each of the project teams that you'd need to sit down in a room together?
Well, I was speaking kind of specifically about community change, but I think it's probably some of the other groups would say something similar. Not all of them maybe have quite the same. The Detroit group probably doesn't have the geography problem that some of the other groups do.
All right, thank you. Sorry, so Mary asked that question again.
When you think about the Fellows Project and your interaction with the different groups, are there what aspirations do you have for what the next steps will be? What the evolution of the Fellows Project be?
Aspirations. That's a great question. Wow, that's a good question. And it's funny because people always are like, so what are your expectations of us? What do we have to do? You gave us money.
Yeah.
I don't know where we're going. This is an experiment. Yeah, what I'd like to see is that I have very short-term aspirations. My short-term aspirations is that the fellows can get this CD practice out. I think that in many different contexts, we learned some kind of, maybe we knew already, but we rediscovered some things that were really important about taking steps to expand communication, to clarify roles, to start some maybe difficult conversations. And as far as the Community Development Society goes, and this is a new aspiration that it's kind of emerging out of this process, but that's that the Fellows has been a little bit of a let's get something done team. They gave us some funds, and we actually went out and we started convening people and groups and talking about CDS and promoting and recruiting. But promoting and recruiting were secondary to the objectives of each of the groups. But the result was that it kind of came back and reflected, I think, positively, I hope positively, on CDS. So maybe my aspiration is that somewhere down the road, that this becomes a little bit more formalized in terms of how the fellows can continue to engage the membership.
So it seems to me like there's a bunch of different pathways before CDS in regard to this. I mean, they could say that was interesting and that's that.
Yeah.
They could say, let's find a way to support the fellows groups that are currently existing to go to the next step. Or they could say, we want to support the existing ones, but we will also want to find a way to add a couple of new ones. But when and how would CDS make that decision, I guess, is
and I wonder, well, and so to me, it's for example with ISQUALS, if the team that was working on that came back with kind of a clear proposal to the CDS board and said, hey, we want to have where cross conference representation and a shared net serves or serve newsletter, or I don't know what it is, but but I think we almost have to bring back a proposal to the board. And I say that in that if, for example, the Change Network wanted to continue to try to get some foundations together to define ways that CDS could open the door for opportunities for framing or measuring community change, they're going to need something more clear, or a little bit more concise about what it is that we learned and what we're proposing.
Yeah.
And I mean, so I would love it if each of these groups was able to continue. I think some may need resources and some may not. What Jim was doing, and Jim and Gary with the international, should be done. And now that we've got a managing director, maybe that's part of his responsibility. Maybe that gets handed over. And that is to do some ongoing webinars, convening. They were networking though. I don't know. It's not just a job task. It really is a network building that we were about, I thought.
Well, it seemed to me, you know, trying to think about what am I hearing as we're talking, it seems to me like when we think about the community of practice issue, the big issue may be every organization is challenged with bringing in new members and building some longevity. And then for community development, we need to do that in a way that reinforces the principles and the best practices. So we have that overarching question that many organizations have: how do we reinvigorate ourselves? How do we reinvent ourselves? And the Fellows Project then is a way of trying to answer what that might look like using the Fellows methodology. And so it's a way to find a way to engage with others so that more people will see CDS as a vehicle for doing their work, but it was also really designed around the interests of that group in doing some work together themselves. So people talked about bringing people together to learn from each other. I think every group talked about, you know, we had this opportunity to learn new things from each other. In that process, we built social capital, so we made friends, we learned more about each other, but we also did some bridging social capital to different organizational structures, maybe more in Detroit than the other ones, but connecting to new people. And then through that process, that intermingling of building social capital around learning each other, I think each group would say we created some new knowledge. Dan, you used the phrase rediscover what we already learned. And when I was writing down create new knowledge, rediscover, I was thinking about the difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom. And really the opportunity here is to help create wisdom. We've got all this information, we've got all these best practices. The wisdom comes from hearing each other's stories and figuring out what the application of that is and what the next questions are we have to answer. Does that make sense?
Yes, I like that.
And so maybe then the two things going forward is the special issue, we frame it around organizational challenges and the CDS experiment to address the organizational challenges around reinventing ourselves and engaging new audiences. And then some of the key elements around learning from each other, social capital, creating wisdom, really that question about what does engagement mean? How do we reinforce what we are learning about engagement from trying to do this work ourselves? And then I think each fellows group has some very specific things around, you know, the research, the you know, the Detroit group talked about standards, definitions, recommendations. John, you talked about um, helping people understand CDS to be as multifaceted as it is. So how do we help people understand? Because we live in an either or world. It's either academic or it's practice. It's either this or it's that. And what CDS is trying to say, no, it's and both, and both together helps us all be more effective. But does that sound like something that pulls together some of our discussion? And are there other things or thoughts you would add to that?
I think you did a good job.
John, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Mary speaks way better than I do, so we'll use her word.
Yeah, let's do that.
There was a lot of eloquence from a lot of different little screams up there today, I thought.
Well, there are, yeah. And so the other thing, you were talking about learning from each other. There's also a part of it that was about common language, shared definitions, and shared understanding. Let's see. You were talking about how you get the information to them, but there was a communication piece here too.
Yeah, around taking our normal ways of speaking and finding ways to say that in the words that other groups use.
Yeah, because it's not their language. There you go. To better connect those outside language. So there's a piece of the language. There's also a piece that goes back a little bit to structuring inclusion. In Detroit, they said it's a different type of conversation. It's a different group. All these different service providers just hadn't gotten together before. And so it provided an opportunity to bring those practitioners together. And so there's that sense of, I think, the language piece, creating a shared understanding and looking for those kind of common goals, and maybe a sense of opportunity for inclusion.
I think I think we're all, we can also, part of the framing is what's the next step and how do you support it? I'm immediately thinking, well, it'd be really great if the Detroit people could get a little money from Kellogg to really build that network. Community Change is always looking for money. Is getting money or resources always the next step, or are there other ways we can move the work forward in each of these groups?
I also want to say, yeah, there was several people said there were resources, there was a time limit, and those kind of structural pieces pushed this forward and made us prioritize, made us organize, made us focus, made us, sorry, yeah. I'm not sure that answered your question, but.
Yeah. Sharon, you did such a good job of pulling stuff out of the Community Change group. I was thinking that it was really good that you were here, because I would not have done as good a job. But it seems to me that what we pulled out, and then if there's a way to have the people in the groups that aren't here reflect on this and see if the framework works for them, if they can add to it, this could turn into a very rich piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to hear from the other groups that weren't here. I was just sitting here as we were talking, thinking about too is the challenges that we've got going on globally, certainly within our own country right now. And, a lot of it, I think, does go back again to this concept of language, that I don't know that there's as much. Well, in some areas there is wide gulfs, but in some areas I think sometimes it's the language we use to state our positions that create some of our dilemmas. You know, I was been thinking all day about Sarah Sanders Huckabee, or Huckabee Sanders, whatever her name is, the president's spokesperson, in her episode at the restaurant. And I was thinking, you know, that I'm not sure how I feel about it. You know, but it seems like that was an opportunity for an education, and I'm not sure. I don't know if that was the right way to handle that situation. I don't know. You know, I know what both sides were trying to accomplish, but I think they just passed each other and neither accomplished anything in what they were trying to do. And I think that comes back again to just learning how to talk to each other. How do we have some dialogue?
Yes, let's solve that.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. There, if you want a minor task to take on for the next year, there you go.
Well,
Yeah.
No, so the good takeaway with that, though, is just what you said. And it's not just like a rhetorical question that is plaguing all of us, which it is, but how do we have dialogue with foundations? How do we have this dialogue with students? How do we have this dialogue opposed to, and I think it was John or maybe Sharon, you said it, but that we talk to each other in code, but how do you break that CD code? Yeah.
I think too often we come in kind of with a position in mind and this is what we want to accomplish, and we often forget that everything's kind of a negotiation. It's a give and take, and that I think that's a skill that many of us could benefit from spending a little more time working on.
So yeah, one of the takeaways is, and maybe this isn't an aha either, but I think we speak in code to be seen as professionals among each other, and that may be the barrier that some of the students feel that they, John, you were saying that they didn't know that they had anything to kind of contribute or bring to this association.
Yeah, and then sorry, my internet keeps going in and out. But sometimes there's what I sensed was this feeling of worthiness, like, oh, I'm just a student, I don't belong there, kind of thing. And so it's this convincing them that their thoughts and feelings are just as valuable as anybody who's presenting or not presenting, because there are many things that you get from attending a conference. You don't have to be a presenter to get something out of a conference.
Yeah, I think that's good. So, Mary, are there other questions that you wanted to ask or highlight?
I can't think of any right now. Do other people have questions they want to give the group?
I have a general one, and I don't know who it's for, but if this were to continue, where do you see yourself, or how do you see yourself advertising to recruit people to continue this project?
It's a good question.
Well, we know from the past surveys that we've done that we have kind of a bifurcated audience. We have the people who belong to CDS because they love going to the conference, and we have the people who belong to CDS because they love the journal. And there are some that do both, but they're two really different groups. So, I mean, and I think we need to get some input from the board before the meeting to be able to say that the fellows group focusing on engaging students wants to continue doing that, and they want to have a mechanism at registration for people to sign up, and the Detroit people want to do that, and other groups want to figure out a way to bring more people into their group. But I don't know, Dan, do you have somebody on the board that you could talk to about what the plan is for giving people answers in a timely fashion so we can act on them?
Well, it came up in our last webinar about kind of this idea of before we present, it'd be nice to know the future of what the board had in mind for the fellows. And yeah, so Jim Cavey said, he'd be willing to raise the question. Jim and Gary are both on the board still.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, when we started this, we actually, kind of by design, I was hoping to have a close connection with the board so that, well, just not to cross wires. And so we had Gary and Jim. Craig Talmadge was on the board. Chris Haynes was helping out and still is, although she won't be at the conference, who was married to the chair at the time. So we entered into this with a real strong connection and communication with the board. And even then throughout the year that's shifted a bit. But so currently Jim and Gary are probably our best representatives to talk to the board. And not that there aren't others that are interested, it's just that they were the strongest from the start to carry through. So yeah, I'm not sure what it could be good. It actually, if there's interest on behalf of these teams, we could go with a proposal that said, hey, the community change team would like to continue their work. This is where where we've come. This is where we're at, and these are our goals. And if you were able to give us another $2,500 in a year, that this is what we would hope to accomplish. I think the board would certainly do that. The board has shifted so much that I've been kind of trying not to get real committed to going in there and saying, hey, we need to do this again. We need to have another fellows group and you need to fund us. I was just kind of like you were saying, I was going to wait and see how this was received. And if it was something that's valuable and they said, we would love to have a second round, then I'd love to help see that happen. Either with the same group to continue on for another year or add another team. I wasn't trying to push an agenda here. And actually kind of on purpose, because I think there's been a little bit of suspicion that the fellows are a lot of the folks really close to the board. I mean, that's worked against us. I've had somebody say, oh, that just seems like the in-group using CDS funds to do what they want. And that hurts when that was framed that way. But I've heard that comment. And so I didn't want to come in and say, hey, give us more money and we'll do this again. I'd like to report on what we did and see if there's interest and support. So if the association doesn't feel like this is an effective way to spend the resources, then I don't want to take that as a personal slight. I just want that to go on as it is. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean, would you guys like to see this continue? And if so, in what form?
Well, community change will probably continue.
Right.
The $2,500 is not the critical thing there. It sounds like the Detroit group wants to continue, and maybe some of those resources would be important to them. I think having some money to spend on engaging students is always important, and they are the future of the organization in a lot of ways. But I'm concerned about the timing, and I know the board's had a lot of transitions, and I'm not sure about how. I mean, the community change group is a lot of old timers in CDS, but the youth group and the Detroit group are all new people to me.
Right.
So I'm not sure where that comment came from. But in light of that comment, clearly community change should not, I don't think community change should say we want more money, but
Right.
I think the projects worked well for CDS.
I felt like they did too. I felt like and it'll be interesting to see if there's a good way to document how we've maybe increased visibility for CDS, but especially during a time of transition. I think we've at least sustained and maybe increased the attention to CDS, the website involvement, the offerings for professional development and opportunities to have these conversations in a way that otherwise wouldn't have been or wasn't possible. So yeah, I feel pretty good about about what we've done. So okay, guys. Well, so what should our next steps be? Mary, you've done a great job of kind of summarizing this. I took a few notes myself, and this, of course, is recorded, so I can go back and flesh this out a little bit. From what we've learned today, how do you envision this getting kind of carried forward and either presented, or is it more for the CD practice? Is this something that we want to highlight at the conference?
Well, I think some of the themes we've come up with you could put into that presentation.
Yeah.
And I think if we could maybe do it doesn't have to be a long letter, but a letter to the board saying, in our discussion about how these projects have worked, here's some things we've come up with, and here are some recommendations the group would like you to consider. I mean, they do meet before the CDS conference, so there is time for them to figure out next steps. Because I would hate for them at the end of the conference say, "Oh yeah, we should have that student group keep going," and then John's lost all his opportunity to network with people and build the group.
Well, that's exactly it. Yeah. So. Okay. So to do that, I could draft up a letter. Shall I share it back with all of us and just say yes, no, edit, tweak?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, if you're going to put each of the group's names on it, yeah, I think you should share it back.
Yeah. Well, even so that I'm not speaking on behalf of a group, like for John, for the student group, saying, hey, John really needs, a couple more $1,000 to move forward, and John saying, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah, so I don't want to speak on without having people see it. So, okay, let me do that, and it'll be very drafty. And then what I hope we can do is actually edit it and change it and make it say what we want and it can agree upon. Okay, I think that's a good idea. So John, is there have you thought about next steps, or I'll let you edit it. I'll just put something down and let you take a look at it. Is that all right? Or we can talk.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
The benefit is that John's office and my office are 2 doors apart. So.
Yeah.
On behalf of the community change team, as I get started, what would you like to draft? Or, I mean, you guys, like you said, you'd like to continue. The money isn't as important. What would you like to ask? Or do you want me just to start it out and leave that place blank and let you guys fill it in?
I mean, I think we should maybe touch base with everybody else, but my sense is if there's $2,500, I'd like it to go to support a new group or continue existing group, because we have been a group for a long time and we're not going to disappear because we're not a fellows group anymore. But being a fellows group at CDS does give us somebody to report to and hence some timelines and focus that's really valuable. So I think staying a CDS focus group would be valuable. What's your thoughts, Sharon?
That's kind of my thought. I mean, we've got $2,500 from this year round yet that, so I would agree. I don't think we need the money. I think it's the accountability, the place to bounce ideas off of. Yeah, so I guess I support continuing. If the board's willing to put more dollars into it, then those dollars ought to be used to either bring in new groups or support some of the other groups that are in this round that need those resources to continue.
Okay. Okay. Well, this will be a very draft because I don't know what Detroit ISQUALS or the international group kind of have in mind, but I think this is helpful. Mary, I know this was a new venture to try to do this virtually, but how do you catch up with groups that weren't in attendance to get their feedback? Is there a good strategy? You send them a picture and notes and see what they have to add? Or?
Yeah, I think, taking a picture of what we have and some notes would be good, but maybe we ask them to respond to a couple of questions to see if they want to add anything.
Could you send me the questions you asked or the key questions you'd like? That would help.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Okay, so the next step, guys, is it's the conference. Next step is we're all going to be on stage together and talking about this. The way that the presentation went, the breakout that you mentioned, Sharon, with about 10 minutes at each group. I think that's. I'm just going to ask each group to maybe put their stuff together. What I can do is put that PowerPoint also on the Google Docs drive, I think. John, do you use Google Docs a lot? Can you do PowerPoint out there?
The program that I'm studying in forces me to use Google Docs. I don't really enjoy them, but I mean, because when you go take something out of a Google Doc and go put it into a Word doc, it's all messed up.
Yeah. Does it work with PowerPoint though? Can you share a PowerPoint?
I can't remember. I think there's something called Google Slides.
Okay.
That you can go with.
I'll put it out. Well, I'll look into sharing it as a Google slide if that works. If not, if each of the teams just wants to add however many slides they think they can cover in 10 minutes, 4 or 5 slides. I don't know, 6 maybe, to frame their part of the conversation. Then I can plug them all into one and have it on a thumb drive.
Okay.
I might send out a request for people to do that by the 15th. Does that sound fair? About a week before the conference?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
I think that'd be good. Okay. So my to-do list is to remind everybody, each team, to get us the slides for the PowerPoint. We were going to put together a 2-pager. And that was, I was telling John this morning, on the call, it was suggested that an idea would be to put together a 2-pager, and I think really that's just our talking points of being able to kind of summarize and refresh, maybe just in a even bulleted way of what it is that our group set out to do and what we did and what we accomplished. And I thought that it would be a good framework maybe to also start pushing toward that CD practice. It wasn't an assignment that everybody had to do. I don't think anybody sent it in yet. But I do think it would be helpful, and it would help us start to get something on paper as we're pushing forward for CD practice. So that is the 2-pager slides, and the third thing is I'll draft a letter to the board. I'm also going to be out for the next 2 weeks. So the 15th is the first day. I think, is the 15th Sunday? Yeah. I think the 16th is actually Monday, and that's my first day back. And then I think the conference starts on the 20th, doesn't it? So it's a pretty tight.
21st.
Yeah. It's a tight turnaround, but I think hopefully if people are available, we can make sure that that board, that the edits are made and the language is in there. So I'll send a draft out before this week, before I leave, and then hopefully everybody will have their edits or recommendations added in there again within the next 2 weeks. Does that sound fair? I'll do that one on a Google Doc maybe. What else do we need to attend to? You guys all look very busy. I know it's a crazy summer, but is there anything else we should be doing? I'm willing to be directed. All right, guys.
I think you've done a wonderful job of facilitating these sessions, and I apologize for missing all the ones I missed.
All the bad ones. You missed all the bad ones.
Well, I have another grant meeting monthly on Monday afternoons, and for a while there, they all hit the same time. Since I'm being paid out of the other one, I really need to attend
There
it.
you go. Exactly. That's a key learning from this grant. You go where what you're paid to do. Thank you, Mary. It's been a lot of fun. Our numbers have dwindled here as we've gone through and gotten closer to the end. And I don't know if that's, I'm not sure why that is, but you know, it may be good even to have an evaluation. To get a sense of whether it's just impossible timing, or if it's just slipped out of priority, or if it's just that, you know, a crazy time of year. So yeah, we may try to ask some questions and get a sense of kind of the effectiveness of this. So, okay, well guys, thank you very much. I appreciate this too. And so we will see you actually in Detroit. Hopefully, please pay attention to my emails. There won't be many, but we'll try to get this all compiled and pulled together before the 20th of July. So,
Thank you, Dan.
hey, well done. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mary,
Bye.
thanks for your
Bye.
flexibility in doing this. This was kind of fun. I know I didn't do it in the capitals. I know I did, but we still captured it, and it was good to facilitate with you. So thank you.
Okay.
All right, guys. Have a good night.
You too.